Test 1, 2, there you go. All right, now we've got some audio. All right, sorry about that little technical glitch, guys. So I'm Austin Petersen, former presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, and today we're going to have a lively little discussion about what is the difference between an anarchist, a minarchist, and a socialist. Because some people get these terms confused. Most people have never heard about what a minarchist is in the first place. So I'm going to sort of debunk some of the basic myths and fallacies about what these terms mean, discuss why I arrived at my personal ideology of constitutional minarchism, and explain to you why I think that is the most superior philosophy for people who believe in limited government. So here we go. All right, guys, so you guys are here. All right, so here we go. Let's talk about first what is socialism. And I'm going to read to you guys a little bit from this book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism. And this is by noted scholar Kevin Williamson, who, if you read the National Review frequently, you'll find out what he is, what he's all about. He's a very respected conservative writer for the National Review. And I want to give you guys this definition so that we can understand, because most people say, especially an anarchist will say that anything the government does is socialism, which is actually not the case, all right? So let's define what socialism is so that we can understand it better, and then we can break that down. Then we can talk about what an anarchist is, and then I'll explain what a minarchist is. And again, this is the Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism. But Kevin writes that socialism is not simply about the redistribution of wealth or income through taxes and government-assisted programs. Socialism is often described as a system that makes charity compulsory, but it is much more than that. Socialism specifically refers to central planning. Let me say that again. Socialism means central planning. A food stamp program is welfare. Government-run farms and grocery stores are socialism. A government housing subsidy is welfare. Government-run housing projects are socialism. A school voucher is welfare, and a government-run school system is socialism. Listen to this. One of the reasons that using this state in this manner is that the government provision of services is thought to guarantee a minimal amount of services. In reality, it does no such thing, but it does create the illusion of a safety net and the feeling of security, even though it is tenuously based in reality and is politically valuable. Now, who are the type of people that are socialists, right? Why does someone come to the conclusion that we need to have government-run farms or government-run healthcare? Like Obamacare, for example, is an example of socialism. If it was just a subsidy so that people could go out and buy healthcare into the private market, that would just be a form of welfare. But Obamacare specifically is socialism because of the Obamacare exchanges. That makes Obamacare specifically a form of central planning, which means that Obamacare, yes, liberals, lefties, and Democrats, yes, Obamacare is socialism. Now listen to this. The type of people who choose to be socialists tend to be people who are highly risk averse. Right? So think about this, highly risk-averse people, they don't start businesses like me, like what I'm doing right now, running my own little business. Instead, they go to work either for well-established businesses or in many cases for government, particularly in education. All right? Highly risk-averse people are willing to trade some amount of efficiency, innovation, and progress for security. Doesn't that sound familiar to you? Think about that. For instance, risk-averse Americans prefer the guaranteed low returns of the Social Security system to the higher returns and manageable risk of private savings and investments. They prefer the guaranteed mediocrity of the government school system to the possibility that a largely privatized system would poorly serve some students. In the recent debate over healthcare reform, many of the better informed and intelligent progressives understood that greater government management of the healthcare system would lead to losses in efficiency, innovation, and quality. But they were willing to accept that trade-off for guaranteed access to care, even if that's diminished quality, right? That's the problem, is that the socialists, the intelligent socialists and progressives know that they are going to harm the system, but they think it's perfectly fine for us to lose efficiency. It's perfectly fine for us to not have innovations, have fewer innovations in healthcare as long as more people are guaranteed the service. But you will practically never find an entrepreneur who believes that Social Security is a better way to organize Americans' retirements. Listen to this. Likewise, you will practically never meet, You'll never find an entrepreneur who believes that Social Security is the right way to do, but likewise, you'll never meet a public teacher who believes otherwise. Unlike in 19th century Europe or 20th century Asia, it is not revolutionary fervor that undergirds the movement towards socialism in the advanced world. In fact, it is the opposite, risk aversion. What does that mean? That means that socialists are not revolutionaries. Actually, socialists are they're the opposite of revolutionaries. These are the people who need to feel safe. They want their government to make them feel secure. And revolutionaries are the type of people who are willing to engage in risk. They're willing to engage in a certain set of danger. Right? They're willing to put aside the danger that is the freedom, the liberty that Thomas Jefferson discussed, and they're willing to say, hey, we are going to guarantee a certain amount of services. So there's no such thing really as a socialist revolutionary, because socialists by nature are risk averse. So what is an anarchist? Well, there's all kinds of different types of anarchists, and I don't want to misconstrue them because I have lots of friends who are anarchists. My boy, Justin Moldo and James Chillemi, these are two very principled anarcho-capitalists. But they aren't the only type of anarchist on the block, right? And there is even a split now in the anarcho-capitalist movement, because half of the people, I would say, who call themselves anarcho-capitalists are supporting Donald Trump, and the other half, I would say, are supporting either no one or Governor Gary Johnson. Of course, it's not very anarchist to support a politician at all, because an anarchist shouldn't be involved in voting or doing anything that's involved with government. Rothbard disagreed. Rothbard was a political anarcho-capitalist. And an anarcho-capitalist is someone who believes that in the absence of government, that private institutions will rise up and that they will take care of all of the ills of society. That means private courts, private military, private law, and specifically no government institutions whatsoever. And anarchy, specifically defined, means without rulers. It doesn't mean without rules, because if you know much about anarcho-capitalism, there are actually quite a few rules. One of the major rules that they demand that society adhere to is the non-aggression principle, for example. And there was actually a short time period when I flirted with anarcho-capitalism and I thought perhaps I was an anarcho-capitalist. And I'm going to show you actually the one major event that sort of got me questioning and thinking and reading more, that made me firmly arrive at the position of constitutional libertarianism, minarchism, as we like to call it. But why do I consider myself a minarchist versus an anarchist? Well, an anarchist, again, there's an anarcho-capitalist, right? But then there's also anarcho-communists. And to me, specifically, an anarcho-communist is someone who believes in anarchy today, socialism tomorrow. What do I mean by that? Well, an anarcho-communist specifically, is someone who wants to destroy the order of government as we have right now, to destroy the government institutions that we currently have, like all other anarchists. But once they have destroyed the institutions or the hierarchies such as they are, an anarcho-communist will want to institute a powerful state. And the idea is, supposedly, yeah, and I have no idea why they possibly think this is true, that once they create an all-powerful central government, that then that government will naturally go away. But even Thomas Jefferson knew that there was no way that that would happen, because the natural tendency is for government to grow and for liberty to shrink. So why would I be a minarchist if I believe that, as Jefferson said, that government will eventually go away? Well, it's because I believe in cycles. I believe that all governments will eventually, I believe in the entropy theory of government, right? So basically that eventually there will be a decline in government, because central planning, that the government will eventually grow to a certain size and then it will collapse. All governments do this. All governments go through periods where they have their height of glory, such as the Roman Empire. It began as a republic, then it became an empire, and then it fell. But to me, the idea is how we manage that decline. Do we manage that decline by extricating ourselves from the system, not involving ourselves in it whatsoever? Because whatever that new world order is going to be after the decline of a government will either be, it's not going to be a utopia, right? So, and socialists and communists who are working every single day to try and take over the means of government so that they can seize the means of production and redistribute it to the people, usually themselves, Then after the decline of government, then of course you will have either an anarchic state, which will lead rise to either a more tyrannical government or to communism. But I don't think that you can have, even the way entropy also works on anarchy, right? And so my question, of course, is why am I not an anarcho-capitalist? Well, specifically, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist because I do believe in some minimal form of positive rights. For example, even in an anarchist society, for example, if you were charged with a crime and you were convicted in a criminal court, well then I believe that you have some form of a civil right to a lawyer. It's not a civil liberty, right? There's a difference between a civil right and a civil liberty. Generally, a civil right is considered something like a positive right. And if you don't know the difference between a positive and a negative right, let me just explain this for you very basically. A positive right is something which requires something from the community in order for you to receive that right. An example of that would be a right to a lawyer. That's a positive right. You need to get something from it. A negative right is a right that you can enjoy that doesn't require anything from anyone else. Examples of this would be your First Amendment rights, free speech. I can engage in free speech all day long, and that doesn't interfere in your right. It requires nothing from you in order for me to exercise my negative right to free speech, or my right to bear arms, for example. If I'm carrying, which we now have constitutional carry here in Missouri, thank you very much, but if I'm carrying, that doesn't interfere with your rights at all, right? So that is a negative right. And I do believe in some small form of positive rights, specifically for children. Let me explain to you why, and let me show you what I'm talking about. This was specifically the end of my flirtation with anarcho-capitalism, such as it is. But let me pull up the monitor for you guys. This is a story that I wrote a few years ago that I reported on over at the Libertarian Republic. And this story, more than anything, really caused me to dig deeper into my worldview and ideology and how I came to constitutionalism versus anarchism, right? This is the story of a boy named Baby Riley who was found starved by his parents nearly to death. They were neglecting him. And so the question, of course, is, does an anarcho-capitalist believe that there should be some form of punishment for this? Well, it depends usually on what sort of anarcho-capitalist that you're talking about, right? Some anarcho-capitalists disagree with you would say, the founder of anarcho-capitalism, Murray Rothbard. And Murray Rothbard believed that there are no positive rights whatsoever. There are only negative rights. So essentially, that child had no positive right to food, care, or sustenance. And of course, if a third party, a government or a posse or whatever, anyone, wanted to step in and help that child, that would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. Why? Because the non-aggression principle states that you have no right to initiate force, specifically violence. So since the parents, and this is pure Rothbard, by the way, in the Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard wrote that specifically that parents have no obligations to feed or clothe or house their children whatsoever. And this has caused a huge debate. Of course, considering myself a pro-life libertarian, I do believe that children deserve some small amount of positive rights. And the reason why is simply because it should be a crime for a parent to have a child, neglect their child, and allow that child to starve to death. That should be a crime. If a third party walks in and interferes with a parent doing that, the pure Rothbardian might say, well, that is an initiation of force. You have no right to step in and interfere with what that parent is doing to his child. Now, Walter Block, who is strangely supporting Donald Trump right now, disagreed with Rothbard, and what he basically said was that there was some form of a contract, a nonverbal contract, that when you have a child, you have an obligation that requires you to, if you cannot take care of that child, to ensure that that child is then safely ported to either an orphanage or to someone else. Well, if you're an anarcho-capitalist, of course, there would be no state orphanages whatsoever, so you're going to have to hope that there's going to be private charity for such a thing. But the difference between an anarcho-capitalist, of course, is that an anarcho-capitalist wants no government, but wants there to be a freedom for capitalists. But an anarcho-communist believes the opposite, all right? So, and the problem, of course, is that you now have all of these anarcho-capitalists who are supporting Donald Trump, which makes what I said about anarcho-communists, that they're anarchists today, communists tomorrow, really a lot of these anarcho-capitalists are, you might call them anarcho-fascists. People like Christopher Cantwell, for example. These are people who are supporting Donald Trump because they want, like what Rothbard wanted, which is to crush minorities, unleash the police on homeless people. These are specifically his words, so I'm not creating a straw man here. I'm stating specifically Rothbard, who I've read extensively in order to come to my worldview. And we'll come to the conclusion here in just a moment of what is a minarchist and why I believe that minarchy is the best form of philosophy. So here's the thing. So we want to talk about anarcho-capitalism, but in regards to minarchism, minarchism actually was conceived as a slight, as an insult by anarchists to people who believed in some small form of government. A minarchist could be someone like myself who is a constitutionalist. Now, when I say that I'm a constitutionalist, that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe in the American Constitution as it lies. That means necessarily that I could want a different form of constitution, right? And when we say, the problem, I see James Chillemi is arguing with me here on Facebook. He's saying, why on earth would you be a constitutionalist? He says, I understand wanting a monopoly on the definition of certain laws, but the Constitution is not what your idea of government and free society should be. Well, that's correct. So that makes me a small c constitutionalist, right? That means that I believe that the people have a right to draw up a form of government for themselves. We have a right to create a government and a system of laws for ourselves to adhere to. That makes me a small c constitutionalist. A big C constitutionalist is someone who says the American Constitution, right or wrong. Well, of course, when I was running for president of the United States, I absolutely must adhere to that form of big C constitutionalism because the president is required to take an oath to preserve and protect that Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. But philosophically, of course, I would make changes to the American Constitution such as it lies. I would abolish the 16th Amendment, the income tax, for example. I would get rid of the 17th Amendment, for example, which took away some of the powers of states and gave more supremacy to the federal government because it allowed for the direct election of senators. But I want to read to you from this article that's on the libertarianrepublic.com. I want to share it with you guys as well. I'll drop it in the live stream debate for you all, or in the chat room for you guys. But I'll drop that for you there. Hey, Melissa Marie, nice to see you all. Dmitry Nosarev, nice to see you all. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what a minarchist is. And let me pop up this on your screen so you can see what I'm talking about. This article is from the libertarianrepublic.com, and it's called What is a Minarchist? An Intro to the Night Watchman State. And you guys can go over to the libertarianrepublic.com, and if you want to find it, just go up to right up here. You can click in the search box, boom, and it'll pop up the search, type in minarchist, and you guys will be able to find the story. And there's actually a really nice long audio podcast where I gave a more detailed explanation, so you guys can follow along with me right over there. So let's read this article and talk about why I am a minarchist. So listen to this. Minarchism, or the belief in a night watchman state, is a term to describe a sect of libertarianism which advocates for a minimal government, dedicated solely to the protection of individual rights. In this libertarian republic, there would be constrained government power, minimal spending, and minimal levels of intervention. The name minarchist originated out of the anarchist movement and was coined by anarchist philosopher Samuel Edward Konkin III. The ideas were popularized in the 60s and 70s by Robert Nozick, whose seminal work, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, attempted to explain what a minimalist form of government would look like. Nozick believed that anarchy, such as that defended by Konkin or by Murray Rothbard, was a utopian ideal that could not and should not exist. Why? Because to be a full anarchist is to believe that the non-aggression principle is optional. Let me explain that to you. An anarchist is someone who must believe that the non-aggression principle is optional, and that an anarcho-capitalist system will eventually develop institutions having the same effect as a state. Ask any anarcho-capitalist, do you think that the non-aggression principle should be enforced? And they will say, oh no, well, we don't want to enforce it, because of course to enforce the non-aggression principle by instilling a law that makes it illegal for someone to use force to intervene, is to make a law, right? And essentially all governments are violations of the non-aggression principle. That is what governments do. Governments are about force, and it's about monopoly of force. So Nozick's night watchman state would have just enough power to prevent the violation of individual rights. And this is what he says. Our main conclusions about the state are that a minimal state, limited to the narrow functions of protection against force, theft, fraud, enforcement of contracts, and so on, is justified. That any more extensive state will violate persons' rights not to be forced to do certain things, and is unjustified, and that the minimal state is inspiring as well as right. The two noteworthy implications are that the state may not use its coercive apparatus for the purpose of getting some citizens to aid others, or in order to prohibit activities to people for their own good or protection. So in essence, if you believe in the non-aggression principle and you believe that it should be enforced, then you're a minarchist. You're someone who believes in a minimal government. That makes you minimally a statist. Of course, to an anarchist, everyone else is a statist. And technically, they are correct. Because to believe in a minimal state is technically to be a statist. So we've got to, unless you're an anarchist, you can't really fling that pejorative around without some hint of irony, at least. But I want you guys to learn more about these terms and these terminology and find out why it is that you believe these things. And the question, of course, of the non-aggression principle lies in whether or not you believe that someone would have the right to allow someone, their child specifically, to starve to death, right? So this is a question, a philosophical question that I pose to people along the campaign trail, and we're going to wrap this up here in just a moment. But if you walk past, answer these questions for me while we're discussing this. Answer these questions for me, yes or no. Simple yes or no questions, okay? If you walk past a homeless person on the street and they're starving to death and you don't give them food, have you committed a crime? Most people would say no, I think. Have you initiated force? Absolutely not. You haven't initiated force. Now, let's say you have a child and it's your child. Your child is starving to death and you choose not to feed your child. Have you committed a crime? Most people might say yes. Have you initiated force? No, you have not initiated force, because simply allowing someone to starve to death is not the initiation of violence. Right? You have to make a logical leap in order to justify it, right? And in order for you to say that there's an implicit contract, the problem with the anarchists is that they say something like, well, the social contract, I didn't sign the social contract, so you can't force the social contract on me. Well, you can't force the non-aggression. You can't turn around then and say that we should all abide by the non-aggression principle, because in essence, the non-aggression principle is a form of a social contract, right? Yes, it is, of course, because it's an implicit contract. It is an implicit contract, similar to how when you go into a restaurant, if you walk into a restaurant and you purchase a meal, you don't have to pay up front generally, right? You pay after it's over. Why? Because you're creating an implicit contract with the waiter and the restaurant when you eat the food that you will pay after. That's similar to what it is when you have a child. It's an implicit contract, and it's the same thing with a constitution. It's an implicit contract. Now, some people will say, well, how if I don't submit to the Constitution, well, then how come I don't want to live by it? Well, you're perfectly free to secede. Well, you're not free to secede, but you can sure try. But it is sort of a like it or leave it sort of a philosophy, because even anarchists, people like Hans Hermann Hoppe, they have this whole philosophy they call being physically removed, and they say people like communists and homosexuals must be physically removed in order for society to be stable and function. Yes, these are the words of anarcho-capitalist Hans Hermann Hoppe. But if there's an implicit contract for purchasing a meal at a restaurant, then how come there can't be an implicit contract for parents to take care of their children? I think Walter Block would say that yes, there is, and there's an implicit contract. Why can't the Constitution be an implicit contract? Why is the NAP not an implicit contract? Why is that not the same thing? See, these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves in order for us to determine what it is we believe and why we believe it. So I hope this has been an entertaining and informing discussion for you all, and that you will share this all on your feeds. Also, here's the last plug I want to do right before I sign off. Thanks so much for tuning in. But if you guys are regular readers of the libertarianrepublic.com, look at this beautiful website with no ads, no pop-ups. It's beautiful, it flows smoothly, and no ads. You know, all you got to do, $5 a month, just go over here. You can purchase a membership. Again, $5 a month, that's not much. And look, you can cancel it anytime. Or you can purchase $55 for a year. That saves you $5, and that helps spread the message of economic freedom and personal liberty. Support libertarian journalism, guys. We're making all kinds of exciting strides, and we're starting to invest more in video, which is what you guys are watching right now. We've got our Freedom Report podcast that you can find. We're at podbean.com. We're also on iTunes. So if you guys are interested in getting involved in helping to support the message of economic freedom and personal liberty, do me a favor, guys, and go over and join the libertarianrepublic.com. All right, so again, thanks very much for tuning into our show today, and I hope that you all have a fantastic week.